Guys, again, thank you so much for coming online tonight. Please get on the line and share about this great information that is now pipelined through LinkedIn and Facebook and all the main social media platforms. Dr. Colin Robertson, I truly appreciate you coming online and having a chat with us, okay? We like to just have chats on our Asia Pacific calls because we find that the valuable information that you just talk about in conversation, instead of doing a big live stream presentation, always benefits the people a lot more. So I'd love to hand it over to you. And first up, Dr. Colin, could you just give us a snippet of, number one, your history, okay, and then also the key reasons why you saw Zinzino as a great vehicle for you to partner with for the next generation of your career?
Sure, yeah, and I apologise for anyone who's heard me talk about this before, because I've been, as a new person to Zinzino, I've been asked this question a lot. But really, my background has been everything from clinical exercise physiologist, working in a big district general hospital, supporting people who have been dealing with and overcoming cancer, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, COPD, stroke, musculoskeletal disorder. So, really that kind of real broad spread of rehabilitative needs within a clinical setup, all the way through to helping athletes and individuals train for the Olympic Games, Beijing, London, Rio. I'm an environmental physiologist, so I've trained people to climb Everest, row across the ocean, the Atlantic, take part in the Marathon des Sables. I've worked a lot in rugby league and rugby union, Premiership football. I've worked a lot with military forces and helping kind of elite military prepare for some of the environments that they need to go into. I'm a researcher, so I contribute both in writing and producing that research, so from research inquiry, but also make up a big part of what we call research coordination here in the UK. So I'm a part of the Health Innovations Board for Greater Manchester. I'm a part of the city's Changing Diabetes strategy, which is a global strategy. I'm currently a part of the Advanced Clinical Practice Steering Group, working with Health Education England in response to COVID-19. So how we can develop those practitioners for the future who are going to help people to recover from COVID-19, long COVID syndrome, and particularly those who've had comorbidities and then encountered the virus. So really across the board, that's kind of a lot of what I've done and where I'm from. Sport has always been the mainstay of that. When I first started out, I just wanted to be a PT. That's what I wanted to do. And I've never lost touch with that. Here in the UK on the Wirral, I run a gym. We've run that gym for 12 years now, which is all about coaching and science informed. I'm a part of the UK with regards to the PT education. So we provide education to PT so that they can upskill. And that's particularly come under attention since COVID, because we've ran the global kind of strategy for PTs and how they can better train to cope with people who've had COVID-19. So why did I come to Zinzino? As I'm going through all that, I kind of lose sense of the question. Why did I come to Zinzino? Well, because as a researcher and as a practitioner, you're just trying to find answers to problems. You're trying to find solutions. That's what it's about. It might seem a bit grand from the outside, but that's it in a nutshell. You want to provide a solution. You want to make things better. And throughout I've said this so many times, and I'll probably say it a million times more, throughout my life, despite our advances clinically, medically, and scientifically, health statistics have got worse, year on year, decade on decade. And that ties into a lot of behavior, thoughts and ideas, particularly around food, certainly around exercise and physical activity. And it's nice to help an athlete get a medal. And it was incredible to get that call when someone's at the top of Everest. But health is the most important thing in the world, the quality of a person's life. And if you're doing all these other things and you've turned your back to that, then as far as I'm concerned, you've got it wrong. You've completely got it wrong. Your priorities are upside down. We've got to take the best information and we've got to make people live better lives, healthier lives, more fulfilled lives, more satisfying lives. And I 100% believe that that's what Zinzino has to offer. I was here working on an epigenetics project for somebody else 12 months ago. And the infamous phone call came through, which is a good friend of mine who said to me, "Col, would you have a look at this product? I've been recommended to have it." He'd had some health issues, some quite serious health issues. And he said, "Look, Col, I'm really, I've been told that this might help." And funny enough, the epigenetics project I was working on was all about omega-3. So because it was a good friend of mine, I thought I'll check it out. This was the first time I'd heard the word Zinzino. And as I've said before, I thought it was going to be 5 minutes, have a look. It was going to be a load of rubbish. And I'd tell them not to worry, fish oil doesn't work. That's what it is. Carry on with your life. And then, if you fast forward the clock, now I now work for them full time, which says it all, if you ask me, because I had a look. And first of all, I saw the test. And I thought that was interesting because that's my background. That's what at the time, by the way, I was a lab director for a huge big labs in Greater Manchester. So that's what we did, morning, noon and night. We test things. We tested athletes, individuals, blood, serum, you name it. We tested. That's what we did. We're in the testing game. And straight away, you had something that was about test your red blood cell count and see where you're at. And then there was the product. And I, very, very cynical about products because most of them are just more nonsense. So I thought, right, let's have a look at this product. What is it that they're trying to push on people? And straight away, I had this moment of going, this is genius. Because every single GP, every single health practitioner around the world has been trying to get people for the past 40 years to take a little bit of olive oil every day. It's anti-inflammatory, high polyphenol. We know it's got, it does wonders. Just take a teaspoon of it every single day. And that's where you start. So you start with the olive oil. You start with the high polyphenol, high phytonutrients olive oil. The next thing, which I've been telling people to do for 20 years, was take vitamin D every single day. And it's got vitamin D in it. So you go, right then. So so every doctor is telling everyone to take olive oil every day, tick. We're all trying to get everyone to increase their vitamin D. And since COVID, everyone knows why, tick. And then we get to the omega-3. And the omega-3 is really important. And because it's encapsulated within the polyphenol, which then acts as a chaperone and protector, right, we're not talking about fish oil. We're talking about omega-3. And more, when I talk to people nowadays, I say, if you need to be convinced that this is not a fish oil business, you have to recognize we have a vegan option. So it's not fish oil. It's high quality omega-3 contained within a high polyphenol, high phytonutrient, extra virgin olive oil with vitamin D. And actually, there's also omega-9 in there as well. So it took me back, and I know you've heard me say this before, Robert, so I apologize. It took me back a couple of years previously. I was at a science conference in the States, and I was laying some criticisms down, really, about 21st century food technology. And I was saying, why has nobody in all this time stepped up and taken 21st century technology and provided a solution, done something really intelligent with it? Why is everybody driven by the bottom line and the profit and make more and make more? And, and why has no one said, we can actually fix things really well? And whilst I was looking at this page and I was seeing the test, and I'd already looked, it was the Trondheim test, it was done at Vitas Lab, so it was all credible, backed up. And then I was looking at the product, I went, this is it. This is it. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is intelligent 21st century technology that is solution focused. So that's why I'm here. I got invited to do a couple of talks, and then a relationship started to form. And luckily for me, Robert, Zinzino liked me as much as I liked them. And now I'm here talking to all you guys.
Absolutely fantastic. And as we spoke about, is this balanced test is the key. As I say, Dr. Robertson, what this does, it holds the omega-3 industry accountable for the inferior products that have been selling people for the last 50 years. That's what this test really does. Along comes this incredible balanced oil product. As you said, it's 21st century product. It is the game changer of the whole deal. So many people say, like you just said about, the test-based nutrition. Well, you test it, you use it, you test it, and proof defeats doubt. Let's talk about that now and educate these guys. Some of the key things you want to share on your PowerPoint about this test-based nutrition and why it is so important.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try and break anybody with a PowerPoint death, but I just want to go through really the concept of test-based and what testing is. And I've put together a dozen slides just to really keep me on track, and I'm not going to kind of bog anyone down with it, but really it's to put that forward as to why I believe it's important and why I think you should recognize that it's important as well. So bear with me, folks. Let's go through this. I'll try not to send you all to sleep, although I appreciate it's later over there than it is here in the UK. So let's have a look through. Let's go through this. Aims of this session really is to know why should we test? Why should we test something? You know, you don't test yourself before you go to the supermarket and buy tonight's evening meal. So why should we start to do it? Why should we take a test-based approach to nutrition? Well, first part is because we can. And the second part is because you can never know too much. But that takes us into the second part of the aim, which is knowing how to know and what makes a test reliable. And then the last part that I hope we're going to cover tonight whilst we're together quite briefly is how does testing a status or a condition empower us to make change? Because a test for the sake of a test is a waste of everybody's time. And it might sound wonderful, but more often than not, these things can promise a lot and deliver very little. So it's really important that we're really focused and specific and go, right then, once I know this, what change can I make? Because if it doesn't make a difference or make a change, then why would you even consider doing it? So that's really where I want to take us within the next few minutes. If you're not testing, you are guessing. Fact. That's my old labs, by the way, which I'm still very proud of because we set that up from the ground. Back in 2012, we established these labs. It's one of my PhD students just there. You know, this is an old saying from sport, and it's actually a saying from science. If you're not testing, then you're just guessing what's going on. And if you have the capacity to measure something more accurately, then it's upon you to do so, because the more accurately we measure something, the more we can do about it. And we can see how sensitive things are to change and then understanding what that change means. If not, if you are just, whether it's your exercise, whether it's your food choices, whether it's the prescription medication that you take, if it's not based on any kind of valuable insight as to why you would need to do so, then it's literally just random. It's literally just guesswork. And whilst that might have been okay 100 years ago, we're living in a far more advanced time now. We can test things. We can test things more accurately, more reliably, and so we should. And certainly that should be true when it comes to our nutrition, because the one thing we've learned, whilst I tell everyone that nutrition is still a primitive science, the one thing we've definitely learned is that individual reaction, individual status with regards to nutrition is phenomenal, and no two people are the same. And often people will go, I know this woman or I know this guy, and they can eat whatever they want and they don't put any weight on. And, you know, I only have to look at, you know, a piece of bread and I get bloated. Now, there's a lot of mythology in that, but there's also a lot of truth. And the truth is that individually we respond and react differently to foods. So when we can assess that and we can see where we're at, then we're better informed. We can do something about it. But more importantly, when it comes to our health, it's kind of identifying, well, what are the parts that I can bolster and make as robust as possible so that I can therefore preserve my health as best as possible. That's the key part of it, because food has changed and we've changed, and our interaction with food has also changed. So there's nothing new about measuring. Most people own a SAD step. They'll have one gathering dust in the bathroom somewhere in their house, and they will occasionally punish themselves by stepping onto it. More often than not, they will make sure that they've starved themselves overnight, been to the toilet that morning, and then they'll get onto the scales to see where the wonderful magical wheel spins to and what number it's going to come up with. So there's nothing new about testing. And in the 21st century, we've got so much more opportunity to test. Test is sold to us. We've got smartwatches and smartphones. We've got online forums, Strava, Garmin, all these places where we can count how many steps we've taken in a day, how many calories we've burnt, how many stairs we've climbed. It can try and tell us something about how we've slept, all these kind of things. And some of these phones and watches now claim to be able to tell you about heart rate variability, which I found fascinating, because in our labs we had hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of kit that we had to hook you up to measure that accurately. But now apparently these phones think they can do it. I'm not so convinced on that one. But other things, they do measure well. And people are starting to become more and more familiar with what value that offers. Knowing, being able to quantify how many steps you've taken in a day, knowing how your heart rate responds to exercise and the intensity that you're exercising for. This is really useful, powerful information that can inform us about how we should structure our exercise, when we should rest, when we should do more, and whether or not we're hitting those kind of targets and totals that we aim to. So testing has become a part of our daily lives. It's a part of how we function now. Advanced analysis leads to enhanced outcomes. That's a couple of snapshots from those labs again. And this is where I was placed for a long, long time, and still am to a certain, to a great degree. I still oversee this type of activity. And now at Zinzino, we've got a number of research projects off the ground, with more growing, more building up on the horizon as well. We're looking at hypertensive studies. We are looking at studies across populations with new products that we're going to be bringing to the market very, very soon. And we're talking to huge, big institutes out in America, performance institutes, about certain types of omega-3 testing we can do with their aspiring athletes that are coming through their system. When we talk about things in sports term, we often talk about something that you might be familiar with, which is the 1% margins. Everything's won on a 1%. And rather than trying to get 100% improvement in one area, we look to get 1% improvement in 100 areas. So we look, and we really look as closely as we can to the adjustments we can make. When I think back to Rio in 2016, this informed the kind of pillows that we got for the athletes village. This informed the kinds of duvets that we got, how we organized, what flights they took. You're looking for these tiny little increments of change. So we want analysis to be really as focused and accurate and reliable as possible, so that we can make these small but meaningful, game-changing and game-winning changes, adaptations, and enhancing our status all the way through. And thankfully now, because of the way things move forward and economies of scale, we can take what was previously quite an exclusive type of laboratory test and make that available to the wider population, because we have the means to do so. The testing we do now, the testing that's done at VITAS labs, the dry blood spot sampling test, there's not a chance the average person in the population could have accessed that kind of test 20 years ago. And now it's being refined and enhanced all the more, so that more people can access it, and actually that the test becomes even more reliable. So then let's go back to our sad step and ask ourselves, what does it really, really tell us? When we stand on the scales, what are we really being told? Well, in all actual fact, very little. Does it tell you how much fat you've lost? Does it tell you how much muscle you've lost? Does it tell you how much water you've lost? Does it tell you water retention, fat loss, muscle gain, muscle loss, fat gain? Does it tell you anything about your immune function? All it does is spin a wheel and tell you what your mass is as a total at that point in time. That's it. And yet people have judged their entire behavior off what that tells them. Whether they eat too much or too little, whether they should go for a longer run or a bike ride, to drink more, drink less. This simple, crude, one-dimensional analysis has literally shaped some people's lives, and more often than not for the better. People have punished themselves with the scales. So the reason why we go back to why would we make more sophisticated analysis available? Because it tells us more, and it can actually tell us something about something we can influence and change. Whereas this is arbitrary. So we can do more because we can. The science has taken us there. So here's how we know how to know. The first part is recognizing the problem. A big part with being a scientific researcher and having spent so long of your career in this area now. I've been working within the space for 27 years now. There are probably people on this call tonight who haven't been born when I started working in this area. The problem with this is sometimes the conversation, so that people understand why we'd even want to measure it in the first place. So when you're speaking to somebody who's never heard of omega-3 or the omega-6-3 ratio, Actually saying to them, you should do a test for this. That's 10 steps ahead. The first part is to say, do you understand how important this is? Because it's not mainstream. I'm convinced, and because I see these things shape up over the course of my career. When I was speaking to people about vitamin D 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, people go, what, really? Is it important? Never heard of it. Why does no one talk about it? What it took, sadly, was a global pandemic and people recognizing that their immune response could be really, really poor, for people to go, wow, vitamin D is really important. That features in this. Now you don't need to convince anyone. People just say to me now, what's the best type? That's the question I get now, not why should I? What's the best type? And I promise you now, it's already starting to change with regards to the importance of the omegas and the 6:3 ratio. More and more people are talking about it as a mainstream conversation because it's been a research conversation for over 4 decades. And now it's reaching that critical point. As such, legislation is changing down where you guys are, that they're going to start to introduce this type of testing for women who are pregnant. Brilliant. These are the bits where we see the tide turn. So more and more people are going to automatically recognize the problem. Then we need to know what question to ask. So, okay, then the ratio, the overall index, which is the one that predicts risk. Okay, that's one part of the question to ask. What is my ratio? The second part of the question is, well, how do I fix it? What's the way that I improve that and get my balance at the right level? And it certainly isn't through standard fish oil. All the research evidence out there tells you that doesn't work. We can come back to that at another point. Then we need to understand the answer. Okay, so we have our result. We know where we're at with regards to our ratio and index. And that takes us straight in to answering and creating and determining a solution, because we understand what this tells us as to where we're at. But these 4 components fit any single problem that you might consider. Recognize the problem, know what question to ask, understand the answer, and then determine a solution. And that's really what my whole professional role is. I'm a knowledge broker. It's down to people like me to recognize problems, know how to ask the right questions, find out those interesting answers, and use that to inform solutions. So Robert, going back to, just to bridge back a moment, why am I at Zinzino? Because I was struggling to do the last part. I was recognizing problems. I knew what question to ask. I understood the answers. The problem we were having was actually creating solutions. And that's what Zinzino does. So that goes back to that again. So when it comes to that test, it's important that it's accurate, okay? So that it's hitting the right area. It's also important that it's precise, consistent, but we need it to be accurate and precise, because you can be accurate but around about and not quite there. You can be precise and consistent but consistently wrong. We need to be accurate and precise with it, okay? So our test relies on the accuracy, the sensitivity, detecting small changes, how reliable that information is, and how repeatable is it. And that all comes down to those certified laboratories at VITAS that maintain the highest possible standards of quality and integrity and uses the most latest up-to-date kit in order to run the analysis. Because without that, we're just arbitrarily measuring things. And that takes us all the way back to that set of scales in the bathroom. And we can't be there. It needs to be accurate and precise. In the instance of Zinzino, and this was something that impressed me from the start, is it's double blind. If it was single blind, neither the researcher nor the participant would, the researcher wouldn't know who the participants were. So that would be Zinzino not knowing you. But double blind is where neither the research nor the participants know the group. And that's what you have. So you send your test off, you have your test code, that goes to VITAS. They don't know who you are. Therefore, they can't tell Zinzino who you are. You haven't told Zinzino who you are. Only you have the code. Only you know that that's your data. And that's the standard it should be at, okay? Because anything other than that brings in bias. And we don't want bias. Otherwise, the credibility of the test falls down. So VITAS itself is a GMP certified independent lab, over 25 years of experience. And by the way, prior to joining Zinzino, I knew who VITAS were. VITAS are a global leader. They work with some of the biggest institutes in the world, from Harvard to Oxford, Cambridge. They're a powerhouse of laboratory testing. Okay, their credibility couldn't be any higher. That was one of the things that really caught my attention early on. It's double blind, so now the lab nor Zinzino knows who submitted the test. Balance ID means only you know, only you can access your data, and Zinzino test is where your results are made available. So we see a lot of common nutrition tests that are coming to the fold at the moment, and admittedly, we're working on some of these ideas behind the scenes at Zinzino too. So we have vitamin D status, that's gaining popularity, vitamin C. A lot of people are familiar with the notion of food intolerance tests, gut biome, which is a really rapidly evolving area and something that we certainly want to delve into more. As I said, just as we were all kind of joining in tonight, the gut is the center of the human universe. If the gut is not right, if we don't care for the gut fauna, if the gut biome is not functioning as it should, then our capacity to absorb nutrients is compromised. And if there's a compromise at that point, then that compromise just has a domino knock-on effect, and less of what we need gets out to the areas where it's needed. So the center of health could well be argued commences within the gut with regards to our nutritional exchange. However, the omega-6-3 ratio is an indication of our cellular status. And as I say all the time, we are all just a collection of billions of cells. This is what we are made of. So we cannot be right at any level if we're not right at a cellular level, because that's the stuff we're made of. And this is really important. And in my opinion, it's notions of cellular health that have been abandoned as food behavior has changed over the past 50, 60, 70 years. Okay, it's all been about taste, it's all been about convenience, and what's been lost within that has certainly been the essential variety and those essential macro micronutrients that make up who and what we are. We've spent 6.5 million years evolving from this planet, but only in the past 100 years have we separated ourselves away from it from a dietary point of view. It's important that we reattach, because we've not evolved past that. We are of the planet, and it's important that we recognize that in concerns of our own health and health status. So this omega-6, omega-3 ratio, you know, we talk about it a lot at Zinzino, and more people around the world are starting to talk about it. It's a heavily researched area. If you go onto Google Scholar, so not Google, Google's a waste of time. Google's only good if you want to buy a new t-shirt. If you want to look at research, you've got to go to Google Scholar. That's where you'll have access to the peer review. So the science that's been through the rigor required. And if you type in omega-6-3 ratio and press go, you're going to see millions, hundreds of thousands of peer-reviewed journals that have investigated this area. And I always say to everyone, the reason why it's investigated so thoroughly is because it's so important. Scientists don't go back just for the sake of it. We don't get funding for that type of research, and we don't have enough time. We only investigate things of interest and concern. And the reason why science has been looking at this for so long, because it's really interesting and of high concern. So please do have a look. Even if you don't read the paper, just go and have a look how long the conversation has been going on for in scientific research terms. And now it's making it through to the mainstream conversation. Good, because that's where we'll really start to bring about change. So inflammation is important. Acute inflammation, if you trip over, if you cut your finger, if you have a cold or a virus, you get this inflammatory response that sends all these messages to your T cells, and the immune response kicks in. And even though you might feel a bit sore or a bit rubbish for a few days, it's that immune response that gets you over it and gets you past it. That's what the vaccine does. So the vaccine goes in, triggers that response. That's why some people feel a bit rough for a couple of days after the vaccine. You've triggered that immune response, and now the body's going to start to take care of itself. The problem we have is whereby we've got our management of inflammation is so poor that it's consistently high. That's the problem we have. Acute inflammation is a life-saving response from the body. Anything beyond that is working against us by those inflammatory markers being high. And we know that the cellular status, the omega-6-3 ratio, gives us a direct insight to what's happening with regards to that inflammatory status. So that's why we take it from there. And also that's kind of where it begins, because if we don't have a sufficient amount of omega-3 within the cell, the omega-6, which is the primary one for triggering this acute life-saving response, takes over. And that's all it wants to do, because that's its job. But we know that when we have sufficient amount of omega-3 within that space, it becomes the conductor, and it takes charge and starts to say what should go on. And it allows the omega-6 to do what it needs to do, but it controls the situation in other terms. So it keeps the membrane nice and malleable, it lets the nutrients in, and it gets those toxins out. So it really does preserve and optimize the status of the cell. And by preserving and optimizing the status of all these billions of cells, it's preserving and optimizing the status of you, of us, because that's what we're made of, okay? So by having the ratio right, everyone plays the game the right way. When you don't have the ratio right, you've got one part playing its part only, taking the lead, and it's too aggressive, and it's doing too much of what we don't need to happen. That's the key part of the mechanism at play here. And this has got out of hand because our dietary shift over the past 80 years has meant that we've got so much more access to omega-6 and ever less access to those vital marine-based omega-3s. So omega-6 has been running free, large, and doing whatever it wants to do and bringing about this sustained state of inflammation. And we just need to get that back on the right terms. So the ratio, which is the first thing that you get told when you do your test, approximates the distribution between the vegetable fatty acids and the fishy acids within your diet, or the marine acids, because like I said, we have a vegan option. A surplus of those omega-6 fatty acids make a diet unbalanced and potentially pro-inflammatory. The optimal ratio of the omega-6, the AA and the EPA is less than 3:1. People often ask, why don't you compare all the omega-6s against all the omega-3s? It's because these two give us an insight to the inflammatory status within the cell. So that's why they're important, that we look at those two, okay? And in other contexts, when we look at the index and we look at the cell protection level, we do look at the role of the DHA and we look at the role of those other omega-3s. But in this instance, when we're considering inflammation, it's important that we focus on these because all the research backs the notion that these give us a direct insight to what's happening at that level. Again, it's about understanding what the test does, the value in the insight of the test, and being specific. As you will know, it's an analysis of 11 fatty acids. There's your full hit there of everything that we look at, from your saturated fats to your omega-9, your omega-6s, and your omega-3s. So it's a comprehensive test. That's why there are other bits of data and feedback that a person will get upon taking the test, not just the ratio. I personally think, and I'm going to try and make this change happen, that we should tell you the index first, because the index is everything. If you're above 8% on your index, so that's a combined DHA and EPA, if you're above 8% and approaching that 9.3%, we pretty much know the rest of the stuff is going to be in good shape. But we tell you the ratio first because most people, that's what they're really interested in, is that cellular inflammation. But I want to change that so that when you come to look at your test data in the future, you're going to get your index. It's going to tell you whether or not you're above that 8%. Then you'll get your ratio, and then we'll talk about all that other good stuff. But it all comes from this analysis here, because people often ask, well, what is it you assess? So as you can see, it's quite involved in itself, just with regards to the level and number of what's analyzed within the red blood cell. Just had a conversation with somebody this morning about this, who was asking me about someone's test. They did a test and then they retested 40 days later, and it looked like things had gone up. The 120 day is really important because this is 120 day plus minus 20 days. So for some individuals, they might show a complete cellular turnover in 100 days. But for others, it could be 140 days. So that 120 day wait is important because in this time, that's the life cycle of the red blood cell. So once we retest in 120 days, we're testing a new batch of red blood cells so we can see how much of you has changed. Anything you measure that's shorter than that period, and certainly up to 40, 50 days, is literally just a measure of change, of turnover. And things within the body are never linear. So it's never just constantly in one direction. Things will undulate on a daily basis, particularly whilst it's going through a period of change. So it's important that we do a baseline test, your first test. You start to take the balance oil and you wait that 120 days until you do the second test, because only then can we reliably say that now we're measuring a new set and we can see what happened and what change has taken place. Don't try and jump the gun. Don't get excited. People do report positive changes, how they feel before that 120 days. That's great. But scientifically, physiologically, we can't measure that until those processes have had sufficient amount of time to do their thing and turn over. So there are things that you can't guess, and this is why testing is important. You can't guess your cellular status. You can't look at yourself in the mirror or someone else and go, I think your ratio is about 7:1. Impossible. You've got to get in, you've got to draw that blood, and you've got to analyze it. You can't guess changes to cellular status. So you can't just start taking a product and go, well, I must be getting better because I'm taking this. There might be tweaks needed. You might increase a little bit, because the balance oil is based on your body mass, 0.15 mil per kilogram of your own body mass. But for some people, they might need a little bit more or even a little bit less. So you can't guess that or can't assume that. We can't assume anything under the hood with regards to our gut biome, with regards to our vitamin D status, any of these things. It's important that we analyze them and we assess them because we can. And the certain thing you can't guess is the future, but you can definitely help to shape it. The future is based entirely upon the types of decisions you make today. Who you are about to become tomorrow, next week, in a year, in 10 years' time is 100% reliant on the things that you choose today. And I 100% believe that people make better choices when they're better informed. At least everything is there for you at hand in order to empower you to make the best of what you've got and know where you can make measurable improvement. And that's why testing is at the very heart of what we do. We will always seek to improve our testing procedures the same way we seek to improve our product. The whole time, it's a Kaizen mindset, continually moving forward, evolving, and bringing about change in everything that we do. So what? That's the big question in science. So now you know something valuable about your current health status, you can take control. You know something valuable about your health risk once you know that index. This new information can directly inform your choices and you are empowered to make positive change. And that is my entire slide deck done. So hopefully everyone's still awake. I will try and do the whole stop share. If there's anything you'd like to ask or bring to my attention, Robert.
Outstanding, my friend, and thank you so much for that. It's just, again, when you collate all that information together and you see some of those key things, especially about that test-based. And the good thing what you just said is because a lot of people do ask that, well, can I test myself in 30 days, 60 days? And what you just stated clearly was that you need the red blood cells to turn around. You need that 120-day cycle to happen within the system to get then the new blood that's being produced. Right. That's quite amazing when you think about it. And Con, can you just talk about a little bit, just on that balanced oil, that some of the changes, and I know you've only been here a short time, but some of the people that from the sporting fraternity that's come to you and said, this is the results I'm having, some of those other people with some medical history or immune histories that are coming to you. Just give us a quick snippet of the results that you've seen over a few minutes.
I mean, the key thing is that, particularly in sport and where all the evidence is around it, is that we see how it enhances recovery. So people experience less muscle tissue breakdown, which is phenomenal when you're working in sport. We get a greater what we call anabolic phase. So we get a better response, bang for buck. You get more adaptation from your training, so you recover better. And then thirdly, their perception of soreness in the wake of training reduces. So we have athletes who are losing are experiencing less muscle damage. They're getting a greater anabolic muscle response and less soreness associated with their training. That means they can train more and get more. So we're keeping athletes in a better kind of training environment and physiological state. And that's all. You feel free to go and have a look at the research literature around that. But that all makes perfect sense, Robert, because again, you are a collection of billions of cells. So if things are right at a cellular level, then we bring about less cellular stress because the nutrients are getting in, the toxins are getting out, the surface is malleable. So again, so people across the board, you know, it's as a part of the research fold, I'm obliged not to talk about testimony and anecdotes, but people, you know, some of the things that I get to see in my position with regards to the changes in people's, I mean, the changes in people's skin, the changes in people's sleep, the changes in, you know, I've seen people who talk a lot about the difference it's made on their daily symptoms and in how they feel and how that's influenced their medication, which all makes sense to me. And there is a ton of research out there. I never like to think of it, and I discourage people from thinking of it in the same way that people think about medicine. Okay, medicine is designed to recognize a certain type of symptom, illness, and typically suppress or manage the symptom. This is not that. This is not that at all. This is a dietary strategy, and this is all about kind of going, well, how well can I make the system so that I don't need to rely on those things? How well can I optimize my health status so that those things just don't play a factor in my life? You know, I've long been an advocate of preventative health, and I'd say that 90% of preventative health comes through your dietary choices. And I say to people, rather than fall into the system of going, well, it's okay, because if that happens, I can just take some painkillers, paracetamol, anti-inflammatory. I can take this to manage my blood pressure. I always say, well, you know what's way better is to never experience that pain. It's way better to never have a blood pressure problem. It's way better to not have a cholesterol problem. And that all ties into your dietary choices. And as I say to everybody, balance oil, extend, protect, xenobiotic. These are not medications. I don't even think of them as supplements. This is high-tech food. It's high-tech, intelligent food. That's the way I think about it. People say, you know, I thought you were a food first nutritionist. And I go, I am. And this is food.
Yeah.
I am. Nothing's changed. This is food. That's what it is. And especially if it's got a plus on it, balance plus, protect plus, extend plus, it's all derived from foods. It's all derived from natural products. So you're just eating really good quality, high-tech food. And it's a cliche, Robert, but it's true. Prevention is better than cure. And I'll finish with the Laird Hamilton quote. I love Laird Hamilton. If you don't know who Laird Hamilton is, surfer, windsurfer, awesome guy. You know, he was asked in an interview, why are you so specific about your diet and that? And he said, because I'm addicted to feeling good. And that's what I say to people. Start the health protocol, start with the balance oil, and just get addicted to feeling good. The rest
Fantastic, Dr. Robertson. Now, we got one question there, which is interesting, and I find it that's the only reason why I'm going to talk about this question. But the comment is we've seen a number of people that she's been working with hair loss. I have, and I know all of my people I deal with have hair gain because of the regrowth within the system. I used to have to shave my head, you know, once a month. I'm now once a week because of the hair growth that comes through. What would cause that? Any idea, or is it something that you've seen before with the balanced soil, or is that just part of the human body?
It's not something I've seen before at all. And this is always the fascinating thing when you look at individual cases, is that there's always so many things around an individual case that, you know, it's hard to capture. You know, you'd have to really sit down and go through an interview with that person and see where they're at. But it's certainly not something that's been brought to my attention before in the context of this. So no, I'm happy to go off and do a specific bit of focused attention in that area and see if I can find some and come back and report on that, Robert. But no, it's not something that's really come across before, but I'm prepared to have a look. It doesn't automatically resonate or make sense to me, but I'm more than happy to go and have a look at that.
No, fantastic. Okay, Dr. Robertson, thank you so much again for coming on and sharing your incredible knowledge, and you know, all the stuff that you bring to Zinzino now is just it's just first class, and we truly appreciate your time, energy, and effort coming on and having a chat with us here in Asia Pacific and in fact around the world. Thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to seeing you in about 3 to 4 months again, and we have a chat again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. And thanks for everyone taking the time to listen. It's a privilege and it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Stay well.
Guys, absolutely appreciate it. Thank you. Bye, guys.